Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Curators Talk. Good to see everyone here. I'd like to introduce our curator, who's going to be speaking with us in just a moment, Christine Fowler Shearer from Akron, Ohio. She's an art historian, curator, and writer whose latest project, Mirror Mirror, focuses on contemporary female artists who focus on issues of identity as a woman, artist, mother, and/or daughter. With a background in the museum field, Shearer has spent the last 20 years raising awareness of non-mainstream artists, periods, and regions. Her interest in women in the arts led her to a PhD in cultural art history from Warnborough College, Ireland in 2017, with a dissertation on 4 female artists working and living in Taos, New Mexico from the 1920s through the 1940s. Shearer received her BA in art history from Kent State University and her MA in art history from the University of Notre Dame in 1996. She attended the Getty Museum Leadership Institute in July 2006. In 2010, she founded her own company, Fowler Artistic, to provide curatorial, editorial, and support services for museums, nonprofits, collectors, and artists. Shearer has curated a number of exhibitions, including the Ohio Presidents, Surprising Legacies, Duo Trio, Diptychs, and Triptychs by 14 Ohio artists, The Urban Landscape, A Tale of Grandeur and Abandonment, Joseph Osicki, Unifying Life, Love, and Art, Against the Grain, Modernism in the Midwest, Midwestern Visions of Impressionism, Breaking with Tradition, Ohio Women Painters, 1870 to 1950, Transcended Memories, Framework of a Community, The Steel Industry in Stark County, 1861 to 1865, Untrodden Paths, Contemporary Landscape Painters, William Glacken's Work and Progress, Carl Gartner, A Story of Earth and Steel, and The Poetics of Place, Charles Birchfield and the Cleveland Connection. Join me in welcoming our guest curator, Christine. Thank you.
Well, that sounds like there's like a huge crowd with all that echoing of the applause, so keep it up. I'm really happy to be here. I want to thank the Decorative Art Center for once again letting me do an exhibition in what I consider to be a really great space to kind of have some fun with some different concepts and stuff. So thank you to everybody at the Decorative Art Center, and especially to Chris for putting up with my ideas, I guess is how we'll go with that. So this exhibit actually, as Kelly kind of hinted with my list of exhibitions, started at the Wright Gallery in Columbus in January of 2018. And there was 14 artists that were in this diptych and triptych show. And then it was such a huge success and people seemed to really like it. So I was very happy to have a chance to kind of reinvent it slightly for here at the Decorative Art Center in Lancaster. So there is one question that I continuously get about this exhibition, and I actually went over it with the docents the other day, and it's this one. What is a diptych or triptych anyway? Like, a lot of people just really are confused. But that's like the geek in me and the art historian in me that kind of loves sort of making connections between history and contemporary art. So a diptych is basically just 2 panels of art that are hinged together, right? What you're looking at here is the coronation diptych of the Virgin and the Last Judgment, which is part of the Cloisters collection of the Met. A lot of early diptychs and triptychs were actually made of ivory. And a triptych, naturally, is just 3 panels that are hinged together to kind of form that story. The other thing that really interests me about the idea of diptych and triptych, being an art historian, is that connection to the past and the fact that this idea of a diptych or a triptych is rooted in a very long artistic tradition. It goes all the way back to Roman times when a Roman emperor would have some great battle or some great thing that he did, and they would commemorate it with these plaques that they would then put together and kind of show that story. And of course, it's usually the story from one perspective. Obviously, he's never going to show the bad side of the emperor. He's going to show the good side if he's the one that commissioned it. So this is very much rooted in tradition. They're often made of ivory, in early times, hinged close together like a book is one way that you can think of them. In the Middle Ages, the diptych and triptych idea continued in a couple different ways. They became a lot more religious in nature. They were a lot of times smaller pieces that somebody that was would commission them for and carry them around with them, especially if you think about the Middle Ages and all the pilgrimages that people made to the churches in Europe. It would be something that was very personal to them that they could carry with them. It would be a memento, it would be something they could pray to however they wanted to look at it. And so you see a lot of these coming with religious themes. You also see a lot of very wealthy people painting themselves in the diptychs and triptychs, or commissioning. They didn't paint them, they commissioned it. So if you look at this one, you have a diptych with Margaret of Austria over here, who is worshiping the Virgin Mary, right? So it kind of also commemorates her status and her power. And then if you go to Italy and you kind of go into some of those churches from the Renaissance, suddenly that idea of the diptych and triptych kind of multiplies into these multi-panel polyptychs, which thank goodness we didn't have any of those in this show because we wouldn't have had room for them probably, where you have these large scale, like 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet high pieces of art that are meant to be seen in a church like this, either behind the altar, above the altar, or in some cases on the altar. So that's kind of just a little bit of an idea of what the diptych and triptych historical tradition is. And it very much was a high point of Christian art for many, many years. The thing that I really like, I guess, about the concept of the diptych and triptych that kind of goes more back to a lot of what my research is on, is that they all kind of are composed of a narrative. There's a reason there are multiple images, and that is because there's a story that's trying to be told. And so this idea of narrative is also something that has evolved over time. And there are a lot of great examples of this idea of narrative from the past that aren't necessarily a diptych or triptych, but I thought I'd show you a few examples. For instance, I'm sure a few of you have heard of the Emperor Jacques Louis, or the artist Jacques Louis David, who painted for the Emperor Napoleon. I'm sure some of you have heard of Napoleon in your past life. He, of course, used narrative to great advantage to kind of promote his right to rule, his role as an emperor as well. And so he had these paintings that were commissioned to kind of tell the story of his importance. You also had artists sometimes focus on new things that were happening in the world, such as the Enlightenment and scientific discovery. And so you have artists who kind of tell the story of that and how these people are kind of inspired by those ideas. So this is Joseph Wright of Derby. This is a philosopher giving a lecture on the orrery in which a lamp is put in the place of the sun. I'm going to guess that an art historian came up with that title because we like to explain things as much as possible. We also like colons a lot too, in case you're curious. So you might wonder what all this has to do with this exhibit and why this exhibit. And the truth of the matter is that narrative has always kind of fascinated me. Kind of why something is being told. Is it a reaction to something? Is it a reflection of something? Is it in response to something that happened? Is it all those different things kind of rolled into one? And so the artists in this exhibition kind of fit those two ideas, the idea of the diptych triptych and the idea of the narrative. And I'm going to be really honest with you. When I first conceived of this idea with a friend of mine from the Ohio Arts Council, he was formerly with them, I thought it was the most brilliant idea I had ever come up with him. We're like, this is going to be the best exhibit ever. And then it took me 6 months to find 3 artists to actually include in the show because I didn't know who was really doing it. And so normally I have a concept and I kind of already have an idea of who I want to include, and that's kind of what I start with. And this was completely different because I had to start with the artist. And so I would meet with an artist and they would tell me, oh, have you talked to so-and-so, 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 so-and-so? And I'd be like, no. And they're like, oh, well, you need to. So that was kind of how this show came about eventually, was through word of mouth. Like, I came across Jennifer Rosengarten when I was visiting with Emily and Aaron in Dayton. They're the ones that told me about her. You know, so it was really kind of a fun way of putting an exhibition together. And so I had a lot of fun in that respect. And the other really great thing about being a curator is you get to go visit everybody's studios and kind of really hear about why they do the things that they do. So there are 18 artists in this exhibition. There are only 17 groupings of work because one artist pair is a husband and wife that work together. So they make up 17 and 18 together. And I'm going to just kind of briefly show you a little bit by each of the artists. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about them because I want you to go to the exhibit and kind of read their statements and really kind of soak in what they're doing. So the exhibit, in some instances, are very clear, perhaps, in what that narrative or that idea is that the artist is trying to get across. And then sometimes it's a little bit more obscure. And other times it's meant to be obscure so that you as a viewer can kind of react to it in the way that you want to react to it. And so there is really a lot of different mediums that were chosen, a bunch of different styles, a bunch of different artists, and kind of how they work and put their concepts together. So I arranged this by gallery because I didn't want to do alphabetical, and I didn't want somebody to think that I chose them first and the other person last, because, you know, so I just went by gallery to kind of make it a little bit more even. So Lori Kellah is one of the artists that was added to this exhibition. She was not in the original one. She is a Cleveland artist who is very much rooted in the idea of the Great Lakes. She grew up in St. Joseph, Michigan. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio. She lives a few houses from the Lake Erie. And she is very much into sort of this complexity of the landscape and kind of drawing attention to that environment in which she lives. So her work is all about sort of crafting these elaborate fictions, all right? So when you look at her artwork, you see a fish and a landscape. They're artificial constructs. She has designed these for herself out of paper and other ephemera, and she has turned them into sort of these scenes that she is talking about. And so she's reimagining Lake Erie. She's kind of reimagining the ecosystems and the species that live and inhabit that area. And she's really kind of telling you about the effects of global warming and things that are happening and how eventually that might all go away. And the only thing that's going to be left is perhaps these fictions that she has created. So that's kind of the story behind her artwork. And they are quite breathtaking in person. Jennifer Rosengarten is an artist that lives in Yellow Springs. If I can remember where everybody lives, it's a good day. I'm gonna see how well I do with this. But she is very much an artist that was in the last exhibit, and I was really happy that she was able to be in this exhibit. She is the only painter in this current exhibition, which I think in some ways is somewhat ironic, considering if you think about past triptychs and diptychs, they're pretty much, if they're not ivory, they're paintings for the most part. But I kind of like that you're the only one, Jennifer, in the show that is actually a painter. And looking at her work and looking at her artist statement, she talks a lot about how she's interested in sort of these opposing tensions in her artwork, whether it be energy or innervation, whether it be light and dark, whether it be something that you see or you don't see. And she considers sort of this work as a layering of experiences. And I think you really get that sense when you look at her work and the layering of the paint and kind of how it's just put on that canvas and just kind of gives you all these different textures and spaces. And so her work, as she said, is a layering of experiences that are perceived, remembered, and imagined through the use of color and line. And so she's in the first gallery as well when you get up to the exhibition. Some of the artists really need to thank Kristen for the long list of names that she gave me when I met with her. I knew Kristen from past experiences that I had with her. And Kristen's work is very personal. And if anybody has ever met Kristen, you'll kind of see that it really reflects who and what she is. She is very much telling you these personal visual narratives in her work. They kind of pertain to her experiences, her beliefs, or even her emotions and thoughts. And she feels that an image is born from a time in her life, and then using those emotions and those thoughts and those experiences, she then reflects those thoughts into her images. And I did ask a few of the artists why they work in this idea of 2 and 3. And Kristen's response was so immediate. It was like, well, the magic number is 3. It's always 3. Like, I always work in 3s. And so when she kind of started elaborating a little bit more, we kind of got to the fact that one piece, image, doesn't really tell the story, and 2 is an incomplete story, and the third one is kind of what completes it. And one of the things that I like about Kristen and a couple of the other artists in this show is that they're not always conceived of immediately as those 3 together. Kristen's pieces tend to evolve over time. So they can be 2 to 3 years apart before she comes up with that finished kind of story. And we also thought it was quite appropriate that I chose these pieces before everything that has happened in the last 6 months, because of the masks and kind of the hiding the true self and the fact that we all have to wear masks except for me right now. And so it was kind of funny that that was the one that we chose to include in the show as well. Terry Albanese does beautiful handcrafted glass works. She gets the glass from the Laurel Highlands, and she hand cuts them into these very long strips of various widths. And the interesting thing about Terry is that she doesn't consider it necessarily glass. She considers it painting with glass. She kind of lays the glass down like an oil painter lays his oils on a canvas, or her oils on a canvas. And she builds up those textures and that story, that image, the same way that a painter would do it with paints and canvas. And her work is very beautiful. It's very hopeful, it's bright, it's calming in some senses, especially when you get kind of close to it and just kind of like take it in. The refraction of light is really nice off of that glass. And unfortunately, images do not do it justice as much as being in front of it does. But again, very wonderful, time-consuming art that she is producing. Michael Oderstadt is another one of the new artists that were included in this exhibition. So Michael Oderstadt has been around and doing a lot of different things for a very long time. He's a photographer. This series specifically that he is working on in this idea of the triptych focuses on the Cuyahoga River on the anniversary of the burning of the Cuyahoga River, which I have no idea exactly what year that was because I wasn't born yet. But everyone tells me it was like 68, 69. Anybody like, yeah? Okay, Greg's telling me that's what it is. All right, so he kind of did it on the anniversary of that, and he did it to kind of bring attention back to this really important natural resource. He was another artist that I kind of asked why the diptych worked in this format, because he doesn't always work this way. He really doesn't. But in this case, it really was meant to be 2 pieces shown together. And he said that he liked it, and it made sense, because he could stand at a place on the Cuyahoga River, and he could take a picture of the water, and then he could get in his kayak, and he could go out and take a picture of the shore at that exact same spot from the opposite view, which is kind of an interesting way of doing it. He also focused on dusk and night for a very specific reason. I think we can all agree that by looking at the city and its environs at night, when the lights kind of, sparkle and kind of highlight things and kind of hide other things, it can be quite beautiful. And I think that is one of the reasons why he did that, was to kind of bring you back to the attention that it is an important resource. It is an important source for our community. And he's transforming them with the light transforms these urban shorelines. Nancy McIntyre is also in this show for the first time. And she's another photographer from the Cleveland area. And she has what she calls the Elizabeth series, which is basically photographs of her daughter over her lifetime, which I got handed to her daughter. I don't know if I would have lasted like 18, 20 years of my mom taking pictures of me. I probably would have got tired eventually. But Nancy really focuses on the complexities of that mother-daughter relationship. And I like these two pieces specifically because if you look at them, they were taken in County Clare, Ireland when her mom was on, or when she was on a fellowship. And Elizabeth is hiding, right, in the grass in the one, and then you can see her fully in the other. And it really kind of mimics sometimes maybe that complexity between a relationship between a mother and a daughter, where sometimes you want your mom to kind of see you and see what you're doing, and then other times you really don't want her to know what you're doing. And so I think it kind of reflects that really well. The other piece in the exhibition that we chose is actually pictures that Nancy took of Elizabeth and 3 of her daycare friends from the time they were 5 until I think 18. We chose 3 of them from 10, 12, and 14. And that dynamic between those girls as well during those really angsty middle-aged years, those of us that are girls know about this, is quite fascinating when you look at it. So that's kind of what Nancy tends to focus on with these constructed narratives that she does. Erin Holster-Almazan is from Dayton. And she does the series of prints here. They're lino cuts. They're very large. The red is a very passionate, vibrant color, which is something that I really, really like. And she is, once again, kind of looking at, kind of like what Kristen does and a few of the other artists, looking at the relationships between women. In this case, women and colleagues and friends and people of the same age, not necessarily a mother-daughter. And if I remember the story right, she had a group of people, group of her friends come. Were you one of them, Jennifer? Jennifer was one of them. Emily, who's also in the show, is another one. I didn't realize you were one of them, but you know what? Now I think I do remember that. And had them talk and kind of interact, and she sketched them. And then kind of the series evolved out of those sketches that she did. And the interesting thing about the prints is it really kind of does reflect the idea that women in some senses are other women's biggest fans, and we want them to succeed, and we do everything in our power to help lift them up. But at the same time, we can be the most competitive, I'm not gonna say the word, yes, I'll think it, and tear them down. And so you kind of have that relationship, right? And she kind of captures that in her works. And the other three that are at the gallery actually have wolves' heads on some of the female figures, which you can read a lot into that too if you want. Melissa Bogley-Woods is from Columbus. So the artists are the people in Columbus probably have heard of her once or twice, or 10 or 12 times. Melissa currently has some work at the Columbus Museum of Art right now too, so that's quite a coup for her. And Melissa is someone that you can talk to for hours and still not quite get exactly what it is that she wants you to understand. And she does that on purpose, I think. She likes that abstract kind of thoughts. She kind of wants you to try to figure it out. She is definitely multidisciplinary. She paints. The first time I met her, she was doing textiles. Now she's into this almost lost form of plaster creations called Skylia. I can have the worst time pronouncing it. And so she kind of creates these pieces out of this plaster that looks like marble. And there is a video in the gallery that kind of shows her process, which is really fascinating. But she's interested in notions of equilibrium, perhaps power and balance at times, imbalance at other times. And she uses that idea of abstraction in the figure and even at times the exhibition space to really kind of get the viewer to have to interact with her artwork. And if you look really closely at these, there is actually a figure or two in them. I'll give you a hint. Here's the head. It's really easy to see in the black and white one. It's a little bit harder to discern in the other ones. Of course, on a slide that's like 15 million feet away from you, it's even harder. But when you go over to the exhibition, try to take a look for those. She did a whole series where she focused on wrestlers and kind of how they interact through their body movements. Carla Miller is a teacher from Ohio University in Athens. And she is very interested in this idea of the drawn mark in her printmaking process. And she's also looking at that drawn mark and the idea of the drawn mark as a parallel for the most basic of thought processes, which is the firing of synapses in your brain. And so she kind of looks at the drawn line forming this connection, right, between 2 points, just like our thoughts often kind of create those connections or paths between different points. And so she tends to do that over and over again in this 2 series of work that she does in a lot of different ways. And you really need to get close to kind of really see the detail in her prints. Agnes Ray is a Columbus artist as well. And she did a series called Dark Pools for a Gilded Age a couple years ago for the Carnegie Museum of Art and History in Pittsburgh. And she's an anthropologist as well as an artist, so kind of her work sometimes has a little bit more of a deeper meaning to it as well, for that simple reason alone. But these are basically photographs that were taken during the Gilded Age, so the end of the 19th century. They were hand painted by somebody at that time. And then Agnes has reproduced them larger and has gone in and put more information and art and mixed media and stuff on it. And her point is to kind of talk to you about the wealth and the legacy of the Gilded Age and that place in American history where 100 and some years afterwards, when we think of the Gilded Age, we think of probably, man, those mansions in Newport. If I could live in one of those for a week, that'd be kind of fun, right? But that was a very small percentage of the population. The reality of the time was much darker and more depressing and much harder for the common person to survive. And so she's kind of trying to draw those parallels. And you will notice that she paints all of the water black. It's a very dark black, so you don't see any reflections at all. So they're quite interesting in that respect as well. Deborah Pinter is a Cleveland artist. She very much is interested in nature and utilizing nature and turning them into these new objects that she creates. She does monotype images for the most part, and for instance, the ones in this show are very much a statement about nature and humanity's relationship to nature. There's a lot of bold patterning that she does through those overlapping of the branches and leaves. And when I saw this piece in Deb's apartment studio, which is very small, she had the middle piece done. And we had a long conversation, and she was saying, I like it, but it's so big, I don't know if I should finish it. And I fell in love with it because there's all this gold and bronze gilding in it that you will notice when you see it in the gallery, which to me had that immediate connection to that past tradition of diptychs and triptychs with the gold that is used. And so to me, it made that really historic connection a little bit more powerful. So I asked her to finish it. So if anybody would like a really large piece for your office, home, or whatever, Deb would love for somebody to get it off her hands, because every time she gets it back, she yells at me because it takes up her hallway. She's tried to pawn it off of me to store for her a couple of times, but it is a really wonderful piece. Stephanie Craig is the other ceramic artist in the exhibition. She is from the Cleveland area as well. And she teaches at Cuyahoga Community College. And her husband is also a ceramic artist, but their styles are completely different. It's kind of interesting. But Stephanie's work right now is really about sort of this elusive nature of memories and kind of looking at her past memories, looking at the lost histories of perhaps a person or a place, and trying to get that idea across in her artwork. And the works that she's really been focusing on are sort of these barren structures. And so if you look at them, you see these structures that are meant to be seen together. And if you think of a tower, perhaps you would think of it as a refuge. Unless you're on the outside of that tower, then it could be not a refuge. It could be, you know, a dwelling that is a little bit more sinister because it's keeping you out. And so she's kind of looking at those sort of barren structures and how they could be a dwelling or not a dwelling, depending on how you perceive them. Art Werger uses his compositions to offer a glimpse of time and space. And he kind of wants it to feel like a representation of shared experience. The thing that I really like about Art's work is sort of the active participation that he wants the viewer to get when he steps into it, especially kind of as a voyeur, because you're kind of like seeing this scene, right, that most people don't see. Like in this instance, the houses and the yards and everything from up above of the bird's eye view, and you're kind of like watching without anybody catching you. Watch that scene. And so his aqua tints and etchings are very detailed. I've had a lot of people tell me that can't be a print. That's got to be a drawing. That's, you know, and it's not. You know, they're very detailed, they're very good, they're very large scale. And they really pretty much kind of reconstruct a record of a shared experience. Julie Ebigenic is another Columbus artist. Her two pieces are sort of mixed media pieces, and they're very much about her personal survival and struggle with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so I noticed when I was talking with the docents this past couple of days, when the first reaction to her pieces is one of awe and beauty, and they're quite taken with it. And then when you start to really kind of delve down into what the meaning behind it is, then you kind of like step back a second and kind of look at it that way. So her work is very much right now about the systematic development of cancer cell and cordyceps metastasis. She's examining the relationship that they have with their host and kind of how they grow and evolve over time. So these three pieces here, which are faux pearls on these necklace displays, continue to get more and more beads put on them and continue to grow up as each stage is developed. And so it's quite lovely seeing how she took something that was so terrible in some senses and used that as a way to kind of get through it and also show you beauty despite all of that. And the piece that she has above the fireplace in the fourth gallery is the best place for that piece, I think. It is just so, so beautiful there. Greg, I didn't save you for last, but you are second to last. So Greg started out as a sculptor, if I remember right, and is now dealing with photography. So he kind of comes at it, I think, with a different perspective than most photographers, because he tends to think more, I'm going to assume, three-dimensionally than most photographers do. And he really is interesting because he's looking at these old processes, like pre-film processes. Like, who does that, right? I love it. And not only that, but he uses his Cleveland environment to also kind of be a source of what he prints some of those things on. So this is a wet collodion on glass and on aluminum picture. And this body of work in particular explores sort of the intimacy of social media, or lack of intimacy, however you want to look at it. and sort of a commentary, right, on that loss of the physical and kind of like the whole selfie idea, right? And when I first saw this piece, I liked it initially before I got all the details behind it for the simple fact that it was a portrait diptych that, again, reminded me of that past tradition of when donors would put themselves in those paintings. And then the more I kind of learned about the process, it got even more intriguing to me. And it's very scientifically technical, so if you want to know more, it's right there. So there's also a video on his process as well that is really good at explaining kind of why he's doing what he's doing. And then last but not least is the artist Emily Sullivan Smith, who also teaches at the University of Dayton. She a lot of times looks at this sort of tenuous balance between humans and nature. A lot of time there is this undertone of environmental activism in her work. And she kind of wants you to infer your own complicity a lot of times in the topics that she has chosen to highlight. The other piece in the show is definitely more of a narrative than this one, but I love these two pieces for the simple fact that she's used gold to print those two images. And the fact that it's a diptych, and each piece is also a diptych within it. You have two birds and you have two bugs. So I just think it's a really nice kind of summation of that idea of twos. And her other one is very much a commentary on why we should never, ever, ever litter or anything that should really get into recycling. So you'll have to take a look at that one as well. So I know that I had an hour, but I don't like to talk that much. But I do like to take questions, and I do want to thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to come kind of hear my crazy thoughts about the exhibit. And I hope that if you haven't seen it, you do go over to see it. And as I said, I can take any questions if you have them or not. The thing I hate about the mask is I can't tell if anybody's even still awake.
Yes, I'm just curious, historically, was the creation of them just because developing the canvas or the product to tell that story on a larger scale would have been challenging, and so that's why they cut it up into different...
I think it's just the idea of telling a story sometimes takes more than one, painting to get that story across. And I think also, if you could do 3 history panels, you definitely were much better at doing stuff than somebody who can only do 1, right? If you think about past art historical traditions, history painting was the most important form of painting for numbers of years, centuries really. And so the diptych and triptych kind of telling those large scale stories just made sense to kind of do it that way. And then of course everything kind of just builds on everything else and eventually shifts to something new. But you would get more money, right? If you had 3 pieces as opposed to 1 as well. So I'm sure there's a couple different reasons why you would do it, but yeah, that's a really good question. Anyone else? No? All right, well thank you very much. And I'll be around if you have any questions that you don't want to ask the whole group, and I'll probably head over there as well to the exhibition. So thank you.